transferred to what's called Explosive Ordnance Disposal, which is Navy EOD. And people would ask me who aren't familiar with the military, and they say, "What is that?" Sounds like the SEALs, because we do a lot of diving, we play with explosives, we do cool guy stuff, we get jump out of planes, all that stuff. We work together with the SEALs all the time. And I just kind of tell people that, I've got some of my closest friends are SEALs. I had SEALs working with me at Miramar for a time. And I tell them, I said, well, the main difference between me and a Navy SEAL is that I don't have any book deals. I don't have a podcast. I'm not running for Congress, and I'm not a Fox News contributor. I had an HR director a few years ago who ended up embezzling $120,000 from us. She's in jail. She's in jail. Or at least the last I checked, she's still in jail. And turns out that this was not her first rodeo. She was essentially a career criminal who had some experience. And then we noticed that a bunch of money, all was like $16,000, went missing all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. And we're like, oh crap, automatically red alert, lock everything down. And then we ended up doing an audit. And then all in, it came out to about $120,000.
All right. Welcome to the Brainwaves podcast by Opus, where we sit down with industry leaders to unpack their journey, explore key challenges, and talk about how they're shaping the future of behavioral health and healthcare technology. I'm your host, Humberto Buniotto, the CEO here at Opus. And today's guest is Tom Sauer, a former Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal officer. That sounds very dangerous. Turned behavioral health leader. Tom is the founder and CEO of Miramar Health, a network of mental health and addiction recovery programs in Southern California, probably the best place in the country, in my opinion. Known for bringing a mission-driven mindset to care delivery, Tom has built Miramar around the core beliefs that outcomes, structure, and dignity should never be compromised. Love that. After serving in some of the most intense, high-risk military environments, Tom turned his focus to a different kind of high-stakes mission, helping people heal. We'll talk about that transition, how he thinks about leadership, and why he believes behavioral health should be held to the same standards of accountability and excellence he learned in the Navy. Tom, we're glad you're here. I know you're dealing with day-to-day business things, so appreciate you still sticking to the calendar, making time today, and chatting with us. First and foremost, thank you for your service. I'm sure everyone listening to this appreciates you and the thousands of uniformed men and women that risk their lives every day to protect us. Maybe we can start with talking a little bit about your military career, your background, and how that kind of shaped your decision to be in behavioral health.
Sure. No, absolutely. No, I appreciate it, Humberto. Yeah, I grew up with, like many folks, I grew up with a father who struggled with depression, mental health issues, and addiction his entire life. So, I grew up when I was a kid. I was tagging along with my dad for AA meetings, when he was in and out of sobriety. And then, divorce, all that standard, pretty standard.
I sympathize. My dad died of an alcoholism issue. I was 6, so I wasn't really around that much, but completely. Yeah, I think a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't pretend like it's anything special, unfortunately. And so then about 5 days before I graduated from high school and 3 weeks before I left for the Marine Corps, I started off my career in the Marines. My dad died of a meth overdose. And so that obviously, pretty impactful on me. And then I didn't really have a whole lot of time to process that because next thing I knew, I was at Marine Corps boot camp. And then when that happened afterwards, I found my way into the Naval Academy. I was very fortunate, worked really hard, and that was kind of a lifelong dream of mine. So I graduated from the Naval Academy in 2006 after 3 years in the Marines, then 4 years at Naval Academy. And then I commissioned in the Navy. I drove ships for a few years, did a few deployments, and then I transferred to what's called Explosive Ordnance Disposal, which is Navy EOD. And we are actually like the predecessors and the ancestors of what later went on to become Navy SEALs. So they had the... the underwater demolition teams and Navy EOD were all kind of part of the same organization back in World War II. And then the 60s, part of them broke off and created the Sea, Air, Land teams, the SEAL teams, which obviously, they're very famous. And so we have a lot of...
They get all the credit, right? But there's a lot of people in the background doing a lot of work too.
Yeah. And the funny thing is like, people would ask me who aren't familiar with the military and they say, what is that? Sounds like the SEALs. Because, we do a lot of diving, we play with explosives, we do cool guy stuff, we get jump out of planes, all that stuff. We work together with the SEALs all the time. And I just kind of tell people that, you know, I've got some of my closest friends are SEALs. I had SEALs working with me at here Miramar for a time. And
Nice.
I tell them, I said, well, the main difference between me and a Navy SEAL is that I don't have any book deals. I don't have a podcast. I'm not running for Congress, and I'm not a Fox News contributor. So those are the main differences between EOD and SEAL.
That's funny.
Most of my SEAL buddies will laugh at that. Not all, but most of them will laugh at that. So they'll own it. But I did that. It was a phenomenal experience. Great organization. I only had one tour one time in Iraq, relatively uneventful. Most of my time was actually spent in the Pacific, the Western Pacific. So I was in Japan, Philippines, Korea. Got to do some fun, interesting things, dealing with the Chinese a little bit. Can't get into too much detail, but I even did some things in Nepal, India, Australia, New Zealand. It was really great. I mean, really rewarding time. Did one tour with U.S. Army Special Forces and focused on what's called the counter OMD mission. So basically countering weapons of mass destruction. You know, 'cause the idea is that if God forbid, you know, a terrorist would try to sneak a nuclear weapon into the United States, it's going to be a Navy EOD tech attached to special operations units. They're the ones who are actually going to it's out of the movies, you know. It's like we actually do have those kinds of capabilities.
I mean, every time my nephew he actually just went in today for his swearing ceremony. He's going into the Army.
Yeah.
And every time I have a conversation with anyone who's a veteran, I always imagine it being like stuff you see is like out of the movies for real.
Some of it is. Some of it was. Right? I gotta say. I mean, not for everybody. Some, you know. I mean, trust me. There were plenty of times in my career that were very mundane and boring, obviously, but. A couple of times, you know, where I'd find out like, we do that? That's awesome. I didn't know we do that. That's pretty cool. So that was fun. No, it was good. And then I was transferring into another community that was like very intelligence focused. I did a lot of intelligence work as well. But then, so I was in Washington, D.C. For language school. They're actually teaching me to speak Thai. And while I was out there, they're going to send me to Thailand for a year, to Bangkok to work at the embassy for a year. And then after that, I was going to go back to Singapore. I went to graduate school in Singapore, and I was going to go back to Singapore for several years and kind of be the U.S. Navy's liaison to Thailand, to the Thai Navy, but based in Singapore. And unfortunately, that job went away while I was going through language training. So then they said,
whereabouts is this? What year?
This was 2017, 2018. Then instead they said, well, we're just going to send you to the Pentagon, and you know, we'll figure out what to do from there. And I said, no, it's done. I'm out. So I decided, you know, I upset a lot of people along the way when it came to that, because they didn't want me to leave, and I was really clear. Like, I joined up into the, you know, I wanted to continue to work overseas. Instead, you're going to stick me in DC, even though I enjoy DC. So I decided to do something else. So then I worked for a defense contractor briefly, but then I knew this wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I had an idea of starting a company, because also I lost so many of my friends to suicide and addiction. You know, I lost probably 3 times as many friends to suicide and addiction than I have to Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban combined. I mean, truly.
It is a veterans, I assume, right?
Veterans and active duty guys, you know? I mean,
I have a good friend. I'm based in Colorado. I have a really good friend who's retired Marine, and we talk a lot about it, but he lost, I don't know how many of his close friends to suicide, and just, you know, all kind of
very common
PTSD and stuff.
And so then when I got out, I wanted to start something else. And so then I kind of related what happened to my father when I was younger. And then I saw what happened with, you know, so many brothers and sisters lost to suicide and addiction. And so I ended up teaming up with one of my classmates from Naval Academy, and we put together a board of directors. I started it, but then he kind of came on soon after, and put together a board of directors and started the company. And then we actually acquired Miramar. It was a much different company. Kind of like your standard Orange County Treatment Center. It was outpatient only at the time. And we took that, but that was really just kind of get things started. And then we, from there, after a few months, we were able to expand to 3 properties, and then for residential and detox, but really with a mental health and trauma focus. And we've expanded some more, and it's been a phenomenal ride. We've treated in the past, I got to say, 6-7 years, we've treated, I think, about 1,000 veterans now. And this is not, when I say 1,000, like, it's not like we just touched them and they had a counseling session with us or something like that. I mean is that, like, they've stayed with us for usually weeks. I mean, usually at least 30 days, most commonly, sometimes 60, 90, 100 days. So the guys that we're taking care of are not the guys who like, hey, I think I'm sad a lot and maybe I drink too much and I'm arguing with my wife, but everything else is okay. These are guys who are near death, maybe looking, they've been incarcerated before or going back into there where it's like they're kind of at the end of the rope. When we talk like rock bottom, those are the folks that we're primarily dealing with. I mean, and we've had guys from every walk of life. We've had some folks who've been a struggle their entire lives. And I've had one guy who was was an All-American linebacker at Stanford, then went to Stanford Law School, flew helicopters for the Marines, then went off to become a, assistant district attorney, and alcohol just destroyed his life, and he had nothing. I mean, nothing. And
one sorry to interrupt you. I've been in this space, in substance use space, for 13 years since we started Opus. And the biggest misconception I had was that addiction was for people who just didn't care, didn't know, like just didn't care, just gave up and were like into that lifestyle, and it just escalated. They started with marijuana and then they just kept using more and more. I had no idea that there were people like this guy that you just described, professionals like around us, people that unseemingly that have issues. So yeah,
exceptionally. I mean, like the guy in his previous life, at least, was an exceptionally high performing, successful guy, right? And I use it. He's one end of the spectrum. We've other folks who have just been very, have been struggling from their youth. And here's one thing that's really interesting about this is that, especially with the veteran side of things, most people assume that if you're having trouble and you're a veteran, that it must have been because you were in really some intense combat and you had horrible combat trauma. Those guys certainly do. I mean, obviously that happens, but the vast majority of the folks that we treat with real problems like don't have combat experience and had a relatively speaking, normal experience in the military that was relatively uneventful. But the reason why we notice is that it's the vast majority of folks, the trauma they deal with was childhood trauma, and they never had a chance to process it, right? So a lot of folks, for a lot of people, the reason they join the military is to get the hell out of Dodge, right? They've got a bad home life, bad family life. They're in a bad town. They need to get the hell out. And what they do then is they just get out and they join the military, which kind of makes sense. It's actually a good decision, probably.
Yeah, for sure.
But the only issue, though, is that they never had any chance to process all the trauma they in their youth. And that's what's kind of happened with me, but to a lesser extent. Yeah, my dad struggled with addiction and he died of it. And then just a couple of weeks later, I'm off at boot camp. So, and I never really had it. I mean, it wasn't until much later in life that I actually kind of really, truly processed it and dealt with it. I kind of just, bottled it up.
Like the guy's way of dealing with it, right? I'm going to go do something really hard so I can kind of push that down.
Yeah, that was me, man. And that was me. And the thing is like, I had it comparatively to some of the folks we deal with, I had it comparatively quite easy. And so, but yeah, and that's really common, and they just never dealt with it. And then it wasn't until they get out of the military that all of a sudden that all that stuff bubbles up again. And it's been festering for years and sometimes decades. And then they have a hard time dealing with it, and they have a hard time adapting to normal life. And look, I was I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I was like a relatively high agency guy. I went to a high performing career field. I went to the Naval Academy, a fancy school that was not easy to get through. And while I was in the military, they sent me to graduate school I went to UCLA and the National University of Singapore. And these are like not easy institutions to get through. And so when I got out, I'm, relatively high functioning, and I still struggled with just some basic stuff, like, oh wait, health insurance. So I got to figure out my health insurance, or just transitioning, having to get your VA benefits. And I even struggled. So I imagine if somebody like me had a hard time, I can only imagine with somebody who, they joined the Army for a few years, and let's say they're a truck driver in Iraq and they're getting blown up all the time, back then. And then, the Army kind of chews them up and spits them out. And they're out in the real world and they don't necessarily have a lot of the life skills or coping skills. And they've got a lot of trauma they dealt with either in the military or before the military. And they have a hard time, adjusting and getting through life and having relationships and all these things, I mean, it's
functioning as a human being in a outside of
Yeah, because I mean, the thing is one thing that's interesting about it is despite the military that had all sorts of challenges, there are a lot of things you never had to worry about. You've got a steady paycheck, right? All the time. It's really hard to get fired from the military. you could literally commit crimes and they still won't get rid of you for months, if not years sometimes, right? I mean, all the processing, the time it takes and the due process to get out. So there's that. You don't have to worry about health insurance. You know that like if something happens to you, whether you get hurt or even if you get killed, your family will be taken care of, right? One way or another, right? And so, there's all those sorts of little life skills that like everything, you have a tough job, but so many of the stuff on the periphery that normal Americans have to deal with all the time, making the rent, keeping my job, struggling for a promotion. It's like, it's very steady in the military. And when you're in the military, it's like the only way you run into financial trouble is if you spend too much, I mean, you give them a set budget and most everything's already taken care of. And as long as that happens, like everything's fine. So
I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. That's really insightful.
It's a little different.
I have a couple of friends that are former military, and one I recall specifically still struggles with. Sometimes we'll have a conversation. Is like, why doesn't it work this way? And I'm like, you should know this, but that's because he was out for a very long time.
Yeah,
I never had to learn. Like you said, he just had it. Like things just happen.
Yep, 100%. So, I mean, that's just one of the things we always just kind of dealt with. But, yeah. And so then when we got out, started the company. And the thing is, like I said, I'm not a clinician. Don't pretend to be one. And, I had a really, now we have a really good team, but also just struggling with all the ins and outs of owning a business and running one, making payroll, and it's like, it's obviously been a challenge. Being an employer in California is a challenge for a number of reasons.
You don't have to tell me, I know.
Yeah. I mean, it just comes down to, anything from taxes are high, regulation is really tough, and just the litigation attitude. I mean, it's like, you have to worry every time you have to fire someone. When you've got all the cause in the world to fire them, you still might have to deal with a lawsuit, and that was bonkers to me, and it's like, I didn't really think that one of my biggest expenses would be legal fees all the time. And the thing is even one of those times where I would ask my attorney, I'm like, are we screwed up? Are we the assholes? I was like, no, you're not at all. This is just the way it is in California. Welcome.
It's just the way it is. You kind of like sunk cost of legal fees for being overprotective on every move you make.
100%.
And are you originally from Southern California? Did you move there after leaving the Army?
My last
or the Navy?
My last duty station was Washington, D.C., and I moved out here just because the opportunity that we came upon was Miramar here in Orange County. But I mean, I went to graduate school at UCLA. I was stationed in San Diego, and when I was a little boy, I lived in Los Angeles. So I've always felt that Southern California is always kind of home to me.
Gotcha.
Despite all the problems we have, we got lousy politics. It's really expensive. The taxes are terrible. The traffic can be bad, but it's beautiful all the time. So
it's hard to beat, right? Every Californian I talk to says the same thing. Like, gorgeous. Here's a list of all the things that suck, but the weather is amazing, so I can't leave.
Yeah, I mean, truly. I mean, it's like, it never gets too hot. I mean, it's like, today it's like, oh, it's really hot today. It's like 78, it's like, and it hardly ever gets, September might get to 90 or so. And then, but it never gets too hot, and it'll still be in the 60s over Christmas, 50s and 60s over Christmas. Great. So what's not to love? And, but yeah, the weather's nice. And, we've kind of really put down roots here. And so, I mean, if I were to go anywhere, it might be Washington, D.C. Like I mentioned earlier, I was kind of getting scouted. I've been offered a job in the admin, but, the only issue though is I don't really, I've got a company, I've got employees here, I've got a business partner that runs a lot of things that can do it. So haven't really made a decision yet. I haven't received a formal offer, but they're still asking me if I'm interested. I mean,
well, how do you plan on doing that? Like, are you going to kind of step away for a few months, or as long as, because presumably the position will be at least until the end of the current president's term, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be that long. People cycle in, cycle out, a lot. But no, it would require me to, put all my shares into a blind trust, divest myself of the company. My partner would be able to handle a lot of that. But at the same time, it's like, hey, this is still my baby. This is something that I started from scratch. And I think it's important that I'm still a part of it. So it's at the same time, it's a hell of an opportunity to go work, either working in the White House or the Pentagon. It's a hell of an opportunity. So I'd have a hard time saying no. But like I said, haven't received a formal offer yet. So I'm just kind of hanging out until.
Let's not jinx it, I guess, right?
Yeah. And I'll make that decision. Cross the bridge when we come to it, I think. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel on that one right now.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
A little bit about, so one of the things I read about you is you said, I'm going to see, I don't know if this is a quote, but you said, or something you wrote, maybe you wrote to somewhere, you said, owning mistakes, demanding excellence, and never outsourcing responsibility.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's a one thing that I kind of believe in is that, obviously, and this is something that they taught me in the military that not everyone in business understands. Many people
Mm,
do, but some don't. Is that you can always delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility, right? And so, at the end of the day, I have the most to gain and the most to lose. So at the end of the day, it all kind of comes to me, right? And so as an owner, and so I know that like your audience is owners and operators of behavioral health companies, right? And so that's just something to realize is that you can hire your way out of a job. I've done that before where essentially I've kind of hired my way out of things. And, that requires a ton of trust of the people you put in charge of handling all that. But at the end of the day, it's on you. And, as far as, and this is just for any business, is you can be wildly successful and, help a lot of people and, make a lot of money just like any business. But also at the same time is, the sky's the limit, but there also is no floor. So it's responsibility. And one thing I got to say is that I do, and again, just speaking as a businessman here, is that I do love the freedom, but it also comes with a ton of responsibility, where it's, I've got the most to gain in terms of just freedom and financial freedom, I guess, but also you got the most to lose because if it fails, then, everyone else can just go get a new job. You're looking at
yeah.
bankrupt, or at least that's a possibility, right? And so that's something that I like. I love the idea of not having a boss because, granted, I spent my entire career having 8 bosses, right? Just in the military and all this stuff. And, I mean, instead now it's like I've got a lot of freedom. There are some weeks where I'm working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. There's some weeks where I'm 2 hours a day. Depends on what's happening, right? And so early on, it was really hard. But once we got moving, we built up steam, we got going. It's like it was good. And I had now that I've got a team that I love and I trust, it's like I feel pretty good. Like they got it. We've got weekly calls, monitor the email. Issue comes up, I deal with it. But it really just comes down to it's just like anything in the government as well. Personnel is policy. So when you're the biggest decisions that I feel making is not really decisions, but hiring and firing, like making sure you've got the right team.
Hmm.
And yeah,
I was gonna sorry to interrupt you.
no,
Just I recorded another podcast before this, and
yeah,
we were talking about hiring and firing and the importance of that for an operator.
yeah,
People tend to get people have a hard time letting people go, and
yes,
they usually hire the wrong person just to fill a seat.
yes,
And to us, when we started 13 years ago, it became very evident to me because we just at one point we were growing so fast we just needed bodies and we just put the wrong people in the wrong place and we paid for it. It ended up costing us. So how do
yes.
you approach that aspect of the business? And
Yeah.
I guess how did you, because in the military, you had people that reported to you, I assume. You had management experience from the military, but in the civilian world, I assume it's a little bit different. So how did you learn the skills to be able to find the right talent and to just be able to say, you're out, you're
How did I
fired?
learn? How did I learn it? With great difficulty. Oh, that's how I learned it. No, I mean just learn the hard way. I don't mind talking about it. It's a matter of public record. I'm not going to name names, but it is public record. I had an HR director a few years ago who ended up embezzling $120,000 from us. She's in jail. She's in jail. Or at least the last I checked, she's still in jail. She might not be anymore. I'm not
Because
sure.
of this.
Yeah, and that was because of that. Yeah, because it turns out and like some of her background checks didn't weren't working because she had an alias, and turns out that this was not her first rodeo. She was essentially a career criminal who had some experience, and we ended up firing her for dropping the ball on a lot of things. And then right before she knew it was coming, and then we noticed that a bunch of money, all was like $16,000, went missing all of a sudden. And we're like, oh crap! We automatically red alert, lock everything down. And then we ended up doing an audit, and it turns out that she had been running. We were growing very fast at the time, and we were hiring a staff accountant and a controller because it was just there's so many transactions, so much growth. We said,
That's
ooh,
when I guess I assume she
yeah,
knew that things could slip through the cracks, right?
and she took advantage of that. And then we found out over the previous 8 or 9 months, she'd been skimming, running off cycle payrolls, doing a couple things here and there. She would run the payroll report, show it to my executive director. She'd review it. It was okay. sign off on it, and then she'd sign off on, put that in the file, and then make changes to the payroll report, right? And that were relatively something was skimming a few $1,000s a year, a few thousand there, and then all in it came out to about $120,000.
Jeez.
Yeah, we had to do a big investigation. We had got an attorney for it, and what's interesting is we did all the investigation, all the work. We did all the legwork for the detectives, the white collar crime detectives, and they're very grateful for that. So we did all the legwork, and we handed them a giant binder with every tabbed out, everything perfect, and then they were able to move pretty quickly. And yeah, last I checked, she's still in Orange County Jail. I'm not sure, but yeah. And I mean, I know I'm not going to get that money back, but but that's a very good example of a hard lesson. You think you trust somebody, and then you do have to learn to be and trust is earned. It's not going to happen automatically. Honestly, I would say now, but we still have a lot of good oversight. But the team I've got now, I feel, knock on wood, I feel very good about.
Nice.
Right.
It's good to know you got a good team behind you.
It is. It's good, and it also, like, the trust has to go both ways too, right? It's like
Sure.
One thing we take pride in is that, generally speaking, we kind of pay above market. We do, for example, we do full medical, dental, vision for all of our employees. We pay 100% of the premiums, and we do 75% for dependents. Not too common in behavioral health care. It's hard to do. So we try to make it, so it's, and one of the things I've said a lot is like, hey guys, if you treat this as like this is just a job, we'll treat you like you're just an employee. And I think that resonates. And so I think that works. And so also it's like, hey, this isn't just a job where we're, selling hot dogs or sneakers or t-shirts or something. I mean, this is something that really impacts people's lives. And I think people realize that. They like the mission and they like being a part of it. So, I mean, we're really fortunate in that regard. And yeah, I'm really proud of and like really humbled by the amount of dedication and work with the team. And I mean that really. I mean,
it's not often that
but the current team,
yeah, I talk to a lot of business leaders, and it's not often that I hear my team is amazing. I'm really proud of them. You hear about all the problems, like you mentioned, with the litigation and stuff, but you don't hear a lot of people say, we got an amazing team. They're in it, on the mission. They know what we're trying to accomplish. And that's amazing to hear.
It took years to get there. So, that's one thing I've definitely learned. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What are some, I guess, jumping around a little bit, what are some ethical challenges and in behavioral health that you're seeing today?
No, that's a great question. Well, one as well, because, nobody wants to talk. Everyone's always scared of the B word, the brokering issue. And one thing that I found is that part of the reason why we went for such a long time doing exclusively VA referrals, it really eliminates, right? We worked exclusively with VA. It really eliminates that aspect of it. And here's something to be completely honest about is that when I first started the company, I was several months in. I never even heard of it. Like, I don't know what do you mean broker? What the kickback? What are you talking about?
Same thing with me.
Yeah. And then somebody explained to me, I'm like, wait, what? And then
people
at first
you
think, yeah. And at first you think, I had to explain it to other people, like friends and family, where I explained it was bad. It's like, well, what's so bad? You're just incentivized. You just want people to go, you're incentivizing people to do something that is ostensibly very good for them, get off drugs, get their life together. It's like, whoa, hold on a second, play it through, right? Where it's like, it comes down to, well, then you're incentivizing them. And if you have somebody who comes in, spends 3-4 weeks in your facility, and then you say, once you finish this, then we'll give you some money. Well, what more often than not, what's that person gonna do with that money? And then go back and it's
exactly
carousel. And then I realize, oh wait, that's human trafficking, what that is. But it doesn't get quite the same amount of attention as other forms of human trafficking do, which is interesting. It does seem like, and also because of that, because we've been almost exclusively VA, we don't really associate too much or interact with other treatment centers, which there's a handful that we interact with that we know and trust, but we're not a part of the ecosystem, which is
like you don't have like outreach teams on the ground doing like
not
referrals and things like that.
Not really. I mean, we've done a little bit, and lately we've had to do some a little bit, but not much. And we've been just sticking to exclusively VA stuff, right? And so there is no inbound outbound referrals, because in order to get a VA referral, it has to be the veteran's VA provider that writes that referral, right? And that's how that works. So it's not like you can refer them out, refer them back to you. It all has to go through VA. So I think in that one aspect, I mean, there's other challenges with that as well that are different, but they're not on the ethical, moral, legal side, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one aspect of that. Like we just don't at Miramar, we don't really deal with that stuff too much. And so I know not everybody has the luxury of doing that, but that's something that we've done. And so being able to like penetrate the VA market, so to speak, it was challenging. I think the fact that we are veteran owned and operated, we
I was
treat
going to ask you about that. Yeah, that must have
that makes a
been a big
difference.
reason.
That does make a difference with VA providers. That kind of gives us a little bit more credibility, and I think that gives us a little bit of preferential treatment, but in a good way, you know. So I think that matters quite a bit. But I didn't know much about any of that stuff, and I'm actually kind of grateful that I don't even have to hear about it. You know what I mean? So that's been really helpful. So that's
Nice.
been one aspect, and it kind of makes us a little unique for Miramar.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. There's a pretty significant aspect of outreach and admissions and marketing that's been associated with some of the more successful
Yeah,
SUD facilities out there.
yeah.
At least the ones we work with or know of.
We
So
we, we
that's actually a really big privilege to be able to work with a VA and have that relationship.
No, I appreciate that. And so one of the things interesting, we had some, you might have heard of the Wounded Warrior Project, right? Which are a large nonprofit. And we had, because we work with them a little bit. And we had one of the more senior folks from the Wounded Warrior Project come and visit us to kind of like, smell us out, to see if they
Yeah, yeah.
were no problem. I just said, come on in. And we are fully transparent. We just kind of said, we said to the guy, hey, you can talk to whoever you want to, talk to my staff, talk to the patients, whatever you want to do. And it's funny, I'd overheard it. I was on the other side of the room. And this blew me away is the gentleman from Wounded Warrior, again, senior executive with them, said, and he's asking one of my case managers, and he said, well, what do you like working about here? What do you like about Miramar? And the first thing right out of his mouth, then hesitate, he goes, well, because they're ethical. And so,
Wow.
and now the thing is, at first,
You couldn't even have coached that if you wanted
no.
to. Hey, when he asked you this, say you're ethical. You couldn't have come up with it.
And right off the bat, because this gentleman had worked at other treatment centers that maybe not, and put a question mark around them. And again, not naming names, you can probably guess. And from the news and all that. And so the thing is he and he said that, and I was very flattered, but at the same time, I'm like, wait, that's the bar? Like that's the bar we're at? Like we're not scumbags, and it was like I felt at the same time I was very flattered, but at the same time I'm like, that's it? We're ethical? We're not criminals. Thank you. So, but I mean, unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast. And like we've had, friends of my family, reach out to us because they had somebody else in their world seeking treatment and they weren't VA related, so they wouldn't be a fit for us. Also, I was a little, I know it sounds strange, but I'm always a little cautious about having people that we're close to or friends of people that I'm close to coming to us because that could just create issues. So I said no, but I told him, I said, if you're looking, I will find and vet a place. I know some places that are good that they could go to. And I said, be careful because they're not all created the same. And those family members were like, what do you mean? No, what do you mean it's not good? Well, some of them could just be sloppy. Some of them could downright be unethical or worse. So, and that's something they didn't know. Most people don't know. And usually whenever they've got a family member or somebody close to them who is in a really tough spot and they need they need help, they don't think about that aspect. They don't think about the vetting or the, are they ethical or that usually just doesn't enter into their mind. They just want to get their son or daughter or spouse or whatever. They just want to get them better. And they think, and like, that's not a consideration. I said, oh no, it needs to be a consideration.
And when you're in that situation, you're considering things that are kind of funnel you into a direction. Like what insurance do you have? Where do you live? Do you have the means to have somebody go to treatment in a different state, maybe?
Yep.
Where maybe they would go to you guys instead of somebody else. So it's not like you have a slate of hundreds of providers you can choose from, and you can just look them up on Google and say, 4.8 stars are great, because even that is manipulated. So it's really hard to find good treatment, right?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely is. So, like I said, I'm not a clinician, but I like to think, that we have folks send us letters. And one time I got a letter and he actually addressed it to me. And I'd only met the gentleman question once. And he wrote it to me, and I scanned it. I anonymized it where I could, scanned it, and sent it out to the whole company, just saying like, hey guys, this is addressed to me, but this is really addressed to y'all. And it was nice because he sent us, told us all the nice things. He actually really said wonderful things about key staff members he worked with really closely. And I thought it was really sweet. He said, I finally got a job. And he sent us his pay stub. And he's up in San Francisco.
Nice.
And he sent us a copy of his pay stub saying, like, I have a job now. I'm on my feet. And, he's got an apartment. He's got a roommate, but he's got an apartment. And that's great. And, for a lot of folks, especially folks who've been struggling really hard, this sounds bad. I don't think it should sound bad, but some people take it the wrong way. It's like, hey, sometimes what does success look like? Success looks like, first, you're alive. You're sober. You're still continuing help, continue your treatment, outpatient, AA meetings, whatever it may be. You can pay the rent, right? And then after all these things, it comes out like you have relationships, as in friendships, right? Maybe you're connecting with your family. Maybe you can start dating somebody. Maybe even you'll get married one day, right? Or maybe reconnect with your family. And those might seem to a lot of Americans like relatively basic, surface level, bare bones levels of operating in the world. But for folks who've been really going through it for years and years, decades sometime, that is what success looks like, where you're able to do those things and actually like just live a productive, fulfilling life.
Yeah. Even if it doesn't mean, even if it's not being a business owner, being a millionaire, just the fact that you can one step at a time, just make incremental progress toward, just reintegrating and having a better life.
Absolutely. 100%.
I think in the US, it's easy to get carried away with like what success looks like, because you can literally do whatever you want. I came to this country when I was 17, and you're literally able to, do whatever you want and grow as a professional, as a person. So it's easy to kind of lose sight of that and say, if I'm not doing what other people around me are doing, I'm not successful. But that's not what it means when you're in recovery. It's a different kind of success.
Yeah. And like, just because what you see other people doing on Instagram doing, one, it's probably bullshit. And then two,
man, that's
you know what I mean?
Whole different.
And then it's like, don't worry about that. Just focus on yourself and your own, and your own fulfillment and your own meaning, right? Notice I don't say being happy, right? Because like it's about fulfillment and meaning. Because guess what? If you focus too much on being happy, one, you probably won't find that fulfillment and meaning. And then also you could find yourself leading in a darker direction, because most of the reason why people get involved in heavy drugs and alcohol is just because you're trying to seek a short-term solution to your lack of happiness, So
sure.
That's very, very common, I found.
Yeah. I read something that you either on social media or something you wrote that one of the things that you put a lot of emphasis on at Miramar is patient dignity.
Yeah.
How do you build that into the culture and the treatment model for you guys?
Well, especially when it comes to veterans is, look, the vast majority of the veterans we treat, the vast majority, the ones that come through are men. Right. I mean, we treat females as well. We even have a separate female track and whatnot. But, I'd say 93, 94% last time I look at numbers are males. So I'm just going to, and speaking as a male veteran, right, I can tell you that as well is, there is a little bit of a tough love aspect to this, right? You can be compassionate, but also like it's like we want you to maintain your dignity. But one great way to maintain your dignity is to stop being a victim, right? That's really it. Because when you're a victim, and woe is me, all these terrible things happen to me. Sometimes even if they're self-inflicted, all these terrible things happen to me. It's sad. Like that is removing dignity. It really is, right? Where something bad's happening and I'm the victim, everything's terrible. It's like, no, it's about like taking charge of your life, taking responsibility, having agency, right? Where it's like, do things happen to me? Do things just happen to me? Or do I make things happen? Right. And I think, and there's a little bit of that where, there's an aspect as well where it's like, hey guys, I know you all were in the military. I was in the military. Guess what? We're in the real world now. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of your service but guess what? That's in the past, right? Now it's like, now it's time to be, productive citizens and good representatives of that veteran community where you came from, right? And so I think that's an important aspect of that. It's like really like removing that victimhood mentality. Again, I'm this as a veteran. I'm not, again, I got to emphasize, not a clinician. I don't pretend to be one. But that's I've noticed from our clinicians that we really focus on, because that resonates more, like dignity, pride of belonging, having agency. That really matters a lot more than simply, I'm sad and I'm sad because I'm sad. And also having like, when it comes to meaning, where your life doesn't revolve around not doing something. And, this is probably one of the few criticisms I'll make of the 12-step program. Because I think, honestly, for a lot of folks, 12-step is the reason why that's the best one, because it's the one that works when you work it, right? That's what they say at the end of all the meetings, keep coming back, works if you work it. And I'm not in recovery or anything like that, but I'm familiar with the 12-step program. And sometimes it comes down to like being proactive in something else, right? Finding something that you try to achieve some excellence in or competency in, and instead of having your life revolving around avoid abstinence from something else, right? So I think that's really important to because because at that time you're still having alcohol and substances control your life, and and it does control your life for a while, but also as you progress and move forward, it's like finding meaning, finding whether it's just hey, maybe having a relationship and eventually starting a family or reconnecting with your family or finding meaningful work and getting good at that, right? There's all sorts of things out there and it really kind of depends on the person. But I think that's what restores and maintains and restores dignity. So I think that's really key to a lot of this.
I think you're probably uniquely qualified to answer this question because of your obviously military background. I'm curious as to whether when you're in the military, when you're in there and you're, living that life, is there a support system for people to get help if they're struggling while in the military? And is there still, because as men, there's always a stigma of seeking help. Doesn't matter if you're in the military or not, if you're a civilian, the same. Is there a system in place for somebody to get help if they're struggling with substance use or anything like that, that does not create any issues for them in their career?
Yes. Short answer is yes. I would say that it depends on the community you're in. When I say community, I'm referring mostly to like what line of work within the military you're in, right? Believe it or not, the more intensive lines of work, the combat arms, infantry, special operation is actually quite good. They're very big on that one. I mean, for example, to give you an idea, is now we have it in my community and almost the rest of the special operations community. When you come back from a deployment, no matter what happened, whether or not you were in combat or not, when you come back from deployment, part of your post-deployment checklist of all the things you have to do is you have to go and spend an hour with the command psychologist right off the bat,
Really?
right? Yeah, it's relatively new. So it's like they have a contracted, psychologist on there and it was like, and it's like, no, you're going to do this. And you're going to sit there for an hour and they're going to ask you questions and they're going to do a checkup on you, right? And I was actually really impressed by that. And
it is impressive.
And that's a relatively new thing. And this is only happening, the last major deployment I had was 2015. Yeah, 2015, I think. Yeah, 2015 when I had to do that, right? Where and I thought that was actually really good. And it kind of comes down from a top-down leadership where it's like, hey guys, if you need help, you better get it. And so, for example, I actually had to send one of my subordinates who was actually a senior enlisted guy who I worked really closely with. We had to send him to treatment. He had what we call an ARI, an alcohol-related incident. He was always a bit of a wild man, a little bit of a partier. They were on I wasn't with them on that trip, but him and a couple other members of my team went out to San Diego, or no, I'm sorry, not San Diego, Arizona, for a skydiving training trip, right? Where it's like an advanced skydiving course. I'd already been through that course. They want to go through it a second time just for more training. They had the availability open. Who wouldn't want to? It's 2 weeks of skydiving.
Well, of course, anybody.
Who wants to go skydiving? I
would sign up tomorrow, of course.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
I couldn't
awesome.
do that. Yeah, I just had a baby. My wife was not into me taking that trip. It was an optional trip. I declined, but it turns out, he had some anger issues and they went out on one of those weekends, got really, really drunk, started to fight with one of my other guys, and then wanders off out in town, falls down, hits his head, was bleeding. And then when the police came, picked him up, they couldn't tell whether or not his behavior and slurring of speech was from a TBI or whether or not he was just drunk. So they assumed the worst. He ended up taking a helicopter ride to the big hospital in Phoenix and was a whole big thing, as you can imagine. And then there'd been a pattern. It wasn't a one-off situation. This just was like really bad. So we sent him there's on base. They had actually like inpatient treatment on base.
Really?
And yeah, he went there, in San Diego, and he went there for a month with other service members. And what they do is, so the way it works in the military, it's interesting, is it depends. It's a little bit different, I think, in the Army and the Air Force, but in the Navy, what they have you do is that they gave him the opportunity. He got lucky. If you decide to make if you decide, you admit, you own up, and you say, I have a problem, and they call it a self-referral, you come and volunteer, say, come forward, like, I've got a substance use disorder problem. Primarily, I have a problem. And I need to go to treatment. Well, they'll treat it as a medical condition and they will send you to treatment. And there's no harm, no foul on your military record, right?
That's what I meant. Okay. So you just, you get the help. That's it. As long as you own up to it.
But if all of a sudden it's imposed on you, as in, i.e., as in you get into trouble and, you get a DUI or an alcohol related incident, then that's called a command referral. And that usually does have strings attached where it's like, hey, this might be the last stop. You're getting out processed, basically kicked out of the Navy. And this is your last stop before you go to the Navy, before you go out to civilian world. My guy already had a very, very good career, a lot of combat experience, very competent guy, just a little too much trouble. He got lucky in the sense that our commanding officer, who'd known him for years, right? We had a very small, tight-knit community, known him for years, had said, hey, I'm going to give you the opportunity to make a self-referral, right? That was kind of,
Wow.
he hooked him up. Like, would you like to make a self-referral? So-and-so?
A wink, wink.
Wink, wink. He said, yes, I would. Good. And last I checked, I think he's still in. Actually, he might be retiring soon, but it worked out, right? And he got lucky. I mean, he dodged a bullet. I mean, professionally, he dodged a bullet there. So that does happen, but but as a general rule, if you self-refer, you'll go to treatment. Sometimes it might be something on a base. They have that. Sometimes they'll contract it out with like a civilian treatment provider who's in network with TRICARE. They can do that as well. And and then from there, it's supposed to be no harm, no foul. And no, it doesn't reflect your military record. But again, if it's command referred, as in it's imposed on you, that usually has consequences. And especially if it's illegal drugs involved, then you're probably being shown the door. But one thing the military will do, if you are being booted from the military because of drugs or alcohol, they will still send you to treatment. And that's your last stop, where basically you're getting out processed, and which honestly I think is respectable. I think that's good. Where they say, hey, we're going to give you a chance, but this is your last stop on your way out the door to be a civilian.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Which I think is good. I think that's the best.
Yeah. No, I think I no idea. Everything you just said, I had no idea. I thought there may not be as many options for veterans or for people in the military.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think what you said before is very insightful in terms of, people had childhood issues, then they go into the military, and then they come out, they got to deal with that. Yeah. That's also something else I hadn't thought about, that there is help available there. And
yeah, there is.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
How do you think, getting off this topic a little bit, but how do you think the industry is going to evolve in the last, say, 5 to 10 years? Like, I know it's a loaded question, but do you see any kind of, I mean, there could be other things like AI, or there could be like the new administration and like how healthcare is going to flow going forward. What do you think?
That's a great question. One of the things is, believe it or not, I'm not as bullish on AI as some people are. I think there's definitely going to be applications, but I don't think it's going to turn into having AI therapy or anything like that, where instead of you going to therapy, you're talking to AI bot. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I think there's definitely AI can be used for tools, on back end work, on when it comes to CRM, anything like that, anything on running treatment models or treatment analysis. I think there's definitely application there. Sure. I think some of it's already happening. One issue is interesting that I have mixed feelings on, and I'll say it that way, is the psychedelic issue, right? So here's the deal. I'm actually a big.
It was just legalized in Colorado, and in fact, I saw in the news last week that the first clinic in Denver was licensed, the first license issued by the city of Denver.
Yeah.
Assisted psychedelic treatment.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. Well, once you make it recreational, people associate it with nonsense, and it devalues the clinical aspect of it, right?
Yeah, and I think they can lead to trouble. So I think those are extremely powerful tools, right? That can be, and so here's how I start off with that. And we're big supporters. Miramar has been. I mean, we've donated like $50,000 to Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, which is one of the nonprofit sponsors, guys. That they send them down to Mexico for treatment. Here's the big caveat how I look at that, but then also my mind is changing on it a little bit. But let me back up. Is that I believe that with there's a couple of things that have to happen, right? First off, you have to be really carefully vetted for that treatment. There are a lot of people who would not be a candidate for it. And we're talking about the ayahuasca, 5-MeO-DMT, not just psilocybin or MDMA, but I think for the guys who go through the really intensive treatment, I think you have to be really heavily vetted. Things that are probably going to exclude you. Again, I'm not a physician, not a clinician, but this is just speaking as a layman here, right?
Oh, but there are things that I agree with you that should exclude you if you have like a existing mental health condition or something
Yeah,
like that.
if you have a history or of schizophrenia in your family or personally you've experienced, even any sort of drug-induced psychosis, especially really common with with methamphetamines, et cetera, any sort of drug-induced psychosis, you're probably not a candidate. I think you should be heavily stabilized ahead of time and go through like the preparation work. Usually, depending if you're in really bad shape, at least a couple weeks, preferably 4 to 6 weeks of stabilization. If you're on any sort of antidepressants, you got to be tapered off of those completely and detox from antidepressants because you're going to have a bad time if you're on any SSRIs and MAOIs. And then really stabilize and prep for it. And then if you go through the actual treatment, that's a day or two, sometimes 3, depending on what you're doing. And then from there, afterward, the most important part is you have to do that integration therapy on the back end. If you don't, you're going to end up right back where you were in 6 to 8 months, maybe worse. We have dealt with folks who had gone through psychedelic treatment down in Mexico, not through us, but we don't deal with any of that stuff. But through a different organization, had gone through that treatment. He's a former SEAL, and he went through all that treatment. And he's like, oh, I'm fine. I'm cured. I'm great. And he was. He's like, no, we still got it. And people are like, please come back. No, I don't need it. I'm fine. And he needed that integration therapy and all that. And then 8 months later, we're on the phone with him and he had a gun to his head, drinking himself to death. And he was ready to go.
Same concept of detox, rest, PHP, kind of the step down process.
Yeah. And I think when that's done, I think that when it's done properly, I think it'd be an excellent tool. But the idea is that it kind of cracks you open, so to speak. And it makes you very, very receptive to CBT, right? And whether it's inpatient or outpatient, it makes you very, very receptive, and it helps all that stuff that got cracked open in you, so to speak, helps it stick, right? I think it's really good. Now, all that said, right, is there's almost and this is, again, I'm speaking for myself personally, right? I'm speaking as a layman. I believe in God, right? I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, right? I'm really concerned that even if those things are notional and they're helping you, I'm not sure when you're encountering and talking to, when you're in that state and you're talking to beings or think you're talking to God, I'm not sure if that's who you're talking to. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. I'm speaking to somebody who, like I said, I believe in all that stuff, right? I'm not, even if it is notionally healthy and good for you, right, on that wall, I'm not sure if that's the safest thing in the world. I don't know if you're actually talking to angels or Jesus or God at that time. You might be talking to somebody else.
But do you think that if it has clinical benefits that have been shown to help people, do you think that matters that much?
That's where I'm conflicted.
Yeah.
Right. I'll just be honest with you. I mean,
no, I'm with you. I'm with you.
It's just, and so if it's helping other people, okay. I don't know if that's something that I would recommend to me or my close family or friends, just for that reason alone. And again, I'm very conflicted. I haven't made my mind up on it yet,
Yeah.
And so, but that's just me, and that's just me. Speaking for
no, I mean, that's I appreciate you being open about that, because I think in the world of the last few years, there's so much division, so much, nobody can talk to each other. Yeah. People just don't want to admit that, hey, I don't really know about this. I'm a layman here. I'm just telling you what I know, and I'm open to having my mind changed.
Yeah.
That's the best position you can be. Like, I just don't know. That's where I'm selling here. I just don't know.
Yeah. No, 100%. Exactly. So, I mean, if you think that, if you consider yourself to be a Christian, especially, you think that God is real and so is the enemy. And so, it could be, I don't know. Again, I haven't made up my mind on it. I'm still
evolving.
Evolving on that. Yeah. 100%, man. So
nice.
Yeah, that's kind of where my take on that is, but I'll say that, but in more concrete terms, especially we're here in California. I mean, not only is it not legalized, it's not clinically indicated anywhere. As a company from a treatment standpoint, we can't touch it. We can't come near it.
But you think that that's going to somehow be integrated into the treatment options?
I think it could
in the future, whether it's in California or different states. Presumably it's going to be Colorado, California, New York, Seattle, Washington, something like that.
I think it could be, and it's kind of cross our bridge when we come to it. But I think it could be. But also, I said, regardless, if it's going to be used, you've got to be really careful with it. These are very, very, very powerful tools. And honestly, I don't think it should be taken lightly. I don't think it's something that I think it should be almost kind of considered last resort, or when things are really bad. That's just That's just kind of
I
my
can see
opinion.
that.
I don't think it's the first tool you go to.
And it's funny you say that because the clinic that just opened here, they're doing, you can schedule a clinical session. I think it's $3,000,
Yeah.
and you can just go. I don't know that they have specific criteria for people to go, and that's a little bit sketchy. I don't know that that's, yeah. I think it's like the Wild West right now because it's so
Yeah.
new. So it's just like treatment. It's going to be like madness, like the B word you said before, and then
Yeah.
it'll self-correct in about 10 years.
Yeah, and here's something else though. Is one thing I will say, and this is the other part. Again, I'm still conflicted. Like I can hold contradictory thoughts in my head at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? Is that one thing that kind of says that it is in support of it in a way? Is a lot of that stuff is not really addictive. And when I say that, because guess what? Right? Because speaking from experience or people I know, it's like when you go through something like that, you don't want to do it again because it was scary as hell. Right? Where I mean, really scary. And it's kind of traumatic in itself. I mean, once you come out the other side, you're, psychologically a lot better off, but it's different from like other drugs, right? Most other drugs, almost any drug out there, it's like you
Feel
want to
great.
do it again. Right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why people do it because it
That's why
feels
we're
great.
here. That's why we're here. It's very destructive, but it's like with alcohol, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, all those drugs is like when you do it, you want to do it again. With psychedelics, when you do a really serious psychedelic session, a lot of people are just kind of like, don't want to do that one again, unless I have to. So I look at like when somebody decides to take that step to do that, things are already really bad. And, I think that is meant to be kind of like a last resort. And in which case it's like, hey, if you're facing either going through this treatment or overdose and dying or killing yourself, okay.
Go through the treatment, yeah.
But somebody who's like, man, I'd really like to quit smoking, cigarettes, right? Like, I don't think you go into do an ayahuasca just to quit cigarettes or something.
I agree.
I don't think that's the move. It's a very heavy tool, very serious tool that requires serious consideration, and and should be taken very, very seriously.
As far as I know, most of the research has actually been done with veterans with PTSD and trauma.
Yeah,
right.
You're right.
Most of the studies have been around that because you have a very large sample population of people that have real trauma that can be tested.
Absolutely.
So,
no, 100%.
yeah.
So, I mean, and that makes sense. And that's one of the aspects is, despite some of my issue with the VA, it's a good transition though, is one aspect the VA is good is because they do a lot of research, right? And the VA does have one thing that's nice. They've got a large sample set of patients where they can run trials
test stuff on. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, ethically, hopefully, but the VA has very much been leading the charge on a lot of those. So, I mean, I even sent two of my guys to go through the MAPS, like basically the treatment course to be administrator to administer. At the time, it was psilocybin and MDMA, like a certification course, and they were outnumbered 5-1 by VA clinicians when they went through.
Really?
There. Yeah. It was, yeah.
Wow.
And so now I sent them through that course, not because we were going to start doing it. It's mostly for their own professional development, just to understand it. Right. And so they paid for the course themselves, but I gave them the time off to go do it. And yeah, it was just mostly just kind of like you call it, continuing education, I guess.
Yeah.
You'd say.
CU credits.
Yeah. So we just kind of had that for them. And that's one thing when they came back and told me, they said they were outnumbered 5-1 of non-VA clinicians versus VA clinicians. Yeah.
It's interesting because whenever you think about, and I think I would assume most people think that way. I think government, they think there's no way that they're on the cutting edge of any kind of research like that. But
here's something
the
they are.
is.
Yeah, here's something that they are. But the thing is, though, is like going to all this training, doing all this, but what do they actually like do boots on the ground? I don't know. They're doing a lot of trials. These things take time. I understand. Even maybe they shouldn't take time, but whatever. And then I'd say the other big point of that is that, dealing with the VA, like I said, is, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, is, one of the issues we've had is that, and is the VA's, people don't realize this. The VA is the second largest agency in the federal government. Did you know that?
Is it really?
The only organization in the federal government that's bigger than the VA is the military.
Wow.
Here, take a guess. As of early this year, how many employees do you think are in the VA? I don't know if you maybe heard the stat.
No idea.
Take a guess.
A couple 100,000?
180,000.
Wow.
Now they're reducing that by a little bit, but $480,000. And last I checked, it's like the Veteran Healthcare Administration, I think it's like $240 billion budget. And the thing is, though, is that it's huge and it's really hard to change things. So also being a community care provider, we're part of the VA Mission Act, right? Which is meant to give veterans choice and more options when the VA was unable to provide care. Because the thing is the VA is essentially operates very similar to an HMO, right? Like, don't like going outside the lifelines, outside of the VA very little. Now this opened it up. The VA required it. However, the thing is, though, is that the VA oftentimes lacks the capacity or the speed to treat a veteran who's in very serious mental health crisis or addiction crisis, right? So, you know, when a veteran comes to their VA provider and they really need help, they can put them on a waiting list for days and weeks. Whereas, you know, this in the civilian world, if you've got even a relatively lousy insurance policy, right? You don't even need to call ahead of time. If you could literally, I mean, technically speaking, I'm sure it does happen. You could go knock on the door of a treatment center and say, "Hey, I need help. Here's my insurance." They do validate their insurance, verify their benefits, and come on in. Welcome, right? And granted, there's co-pays, deductibles involved, sure. But the thing is, the veterans don't have that option. The VA can put them on a waiting list for up to 28 days, and it's often longer than that. And the issue we've had is when a veteran says they need help, and you know as well as that, they need help right away. When they get told, oh, well, we can get you to come in and schedule for an assessment in 10 days, and then you'll go on the waiting list. It might be a couple weeks after that. We're not sure. Veteran hears is like, oh, you're not going to help me. Right? That's what that really is, especially when they're
kind of like the Canadian model or the European model where you're like,
right.
You're going to get care just on our timeline.
Right, exactly. And the thing is, though, is like, we don't treat somebody who's in an addiction crisis as urgent or emergent, right? When they need to. You know, they need to be, when somebody comes up and says, "Hey, I'm ready," grab them by the collar, like, let's go right now, pack your bag. You're getting in the car, you're getting on the plane, let's go. And the VA doesn't do that. They don't really recognize that. So the big thing that I mentioned, I was on, you might have heard of The Blaze. It's a conservative network. I was on the show. I was on the show with them, and they asked me that, and I just last week, actually, and it was really nice. The clip that I said, they clipped it for me, and it's gotten 500,000 views on Twitter.
Wow, nice.
Is basically said, like, why is it veterans don't have that same level of care? Exactly what I just told you. You could walk in somewhere, get seen right away. The VA doesn't have that. They don't. And the VA will openly deny. There's been cases where they say, "Hey, we would like to come to Miramar Community Care Provider." We're raising our hand saying, "We can have them in our care by lunch." And the VA is like, no, they can't. And we've had cases of guys who died that we find out after the fact, exactly that. They hear they can't help them. We've reached out to them to try to, like, "Hey, we'll take them on scholarship. We don't care. Just come on in. Let's go." And the VA, and by the time we get to them, he was dead. It happened just last summer with a veteran from Los Angeles. It really sucked. I mean, and the thing is, that's just the ones we know about. What about all the ones we don't know about, you know? And so that's one of the big things we've been pushing. And everyone loves to say in Capitol Hill and in Washington, D.C., that veterans issues in the VA, it's a nonpartisan, non-political issue. The hell it isn't, right? I mean, it's like, it is a very partisan political issue. And not to get all partisan political on it, but what it really comes down to is there's one side believes in veteran choice, making sure the veteran gets taken care of, whether or not that's in the private sector or public sector, i.e. the VA. There's another side that believes that their number one, the VA, there's a lot of people within the VA, especially in leadership positions, that their priority, their number one priority is not the veterans they treat. Their number one priority is the VA. Their organization is what's number one priority to them. And it's just sad to say that. Now, I'm not talking about the boots on the ground nurses and social workers and therapists who are like boots on the ground directly facing the veterans. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking, most of those folks, the vast majority, are great people. They deserve medals. They deserve parades. I'm really talking about administrators who are part of the bureaucracy that are more concerned with preserving the integrity and preserving the budget of that organization. That is their number one priority. It's a very similar relationship between the VA and community care as there is between public school systems and charter schools, right? Community care provider is the charter school. What does that public school district think of that charter school, right? What does the union think of them? See where I'm going with this? So they look at community care and saying, oh, they just want to privatize the VA. Nobody's calling for the VA to get shut down. It's not here to get privatized, but we're here to provide additional options to veterans. The number one place. So, hey, if a veteran says, "Hey, I'll wait," or there's something available at the VA, and I want to go to the state with a VA facility, fine, great, go for it, right? But if they say, or if a VA facility isn't available and community care is right away, they should be able to go to that community care facility, and there should not be any VA bureaucrat or any provider anywhere telling them, "Oh, no, you have to wait. Oh, no, you can't go to community care." That's not how the law is written, but that's how it's being executed. And that's a real problem. And there are piles and piles of dead veterans' bodies to show for it. And I mean that. So it's a really important issue. It
And
started off.
kind of a weird thing, because if presumably the cost of the VA is about the same, it can't be that much more dramatically. No,
actually, it's a lot more expensive at the VA. Yeah, I mean, I've seen VA officials advertise. They say that it costs to put a veteran through residential treatment within a VA facility, right? Because now you got to think about all the bloat, the administration behind it, the buildings, the federal government, right? Costs about $5,000 a day, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, it costs almost any private facility less than half that, right? And we're talking just cost, or even a lot, like even a third of that, right? So yeah, that's the issue there, because we are more cost effective. And then depending on the facility, not all community care providers are the same, just like everything. I would say that generally speaking, community care might be a little bit better. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, people can argue that, right? And fair, right? Because there are some VAs that are fantastic. There are some that are not. And so there are some community care providers, and, just like any other private treatment center, right? There's some that are great. There's some that are not, and so, but I think you should still be able to have that choice. But especially more important when you're dealing with somebody who is in that system, they need to get off the X, as we say, like use a military term, get them out of the fight, get them out of the firefight, get them off, get them off the street, get them in a bed somewhere, right? And that is more important than deciding whether or not, is this another higher quality facility in the VA? Let's waiting list. No, you got to get them, you got to grab them by the collar, and they got to get into treatment right away, one way or another.
Agreed. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording. Is that part of what you're trying to help change in DC, in Washington?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Kind of one of your missions?
Yeah, I testified before the House Veterans Affairs Committee about 2 years ago. I might be testifying for the Senate in the coming months, not sure yet. And then I actually work pretty closely with folks at the White House right now, because, now that the Trump administration, the Mission Act, which created the Community Care Network, that was part of the Trump administration, the first Trump administration. And now, the Trump administration is learning that, wait a second, VA has not been executing the law as it's prescribed, but it just takes a lot of time to turn that ship around. Because like I said, the organization. So I've even been frustrated, to be completely honest, with the VA now, because I feel they're not moving fast enough. And I feel there are decisions that can be made right away, that policy decisions be made right away that haven't been getting done. I'm worried that, people in the field and then at the regional levels within the VA are telling the big VA central office in Washington, D.C., telling them what they want to hear. So D.C. thinks is happening isn't what's actually happening in the field. Just like a lot of things in the federal government, many such cases. So I suspect that's what's going on right now. And
but it's likely that and again, not to get political, but if there's an administration that's going to be able to move the ship faster, it's probably this one.
I would hope so.
Because they're disrupting a lot of different fields, whether it's with Doge and they're just kind of like doing stuff and then waiting to be challenged. So instead of going through the bureaucracy of hiring a bunch of consultants that are going to do an assessment, it's going to take 5 years. By the time the assessment comes out, there's another president and nothing happens. So if anything, this is the guy that's going to push things to change, right?
I agree. And I think change is coming soon. It's just not soon enough as far as you ask me, but that's just me. But for a great example, no matter what someone's take on immigration is, they shut down the border in a couple of months. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, they're effective, right? So, I mean, it shows that it was less an issue of, it's too hard. I don't think it's less. I think it's just more a matter of will, just political will. Are you willing to do this? Are you willing to ruffle some feathers?
Yeah.
And I think we're getting there.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, I kept you for much longer than we originally planned.
All good.
It's all because it's been a great chat. I wanted to ask you two questions before we finish.
Sure.
First, if Tom Sauer is not everything we talked about in the podcast, military, now behavioral health, entrepreneur and leader, what would you have done instead? Is there another kind of dream version of your life that you would have pursued? I'll give you an example. I've always wanted to be a pilot.
Yeah.
And it just never turned out to be that way. And if somebody asked me that, I'd say I'd want to be a commercial airline pilot, which is got nothing to do with what I do now, but it's weird. twist?
No, there are probably some other things in the military that I don't regret my time and what I did in the military at all. But like, as I spent time around, like, ooh, that would have been a fun career too. Yeah. Flying helicopters would have been pretty cool. I think maybe
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. But, honestly, I'd say that, like I mentioned earlier, if I couldn't do this, I might have a chance to do it as well. As I'm being looked at for a job in the Trump administration, and that would be something really great. I might actually get to do it. I'm not sure yet. It depends on the timing. Depends on where the company's going. Obviously, I'd have to fully step away from the company, making sure it's in good hands. And I think it is. Like I said, I've got a great team. But yeah, I think I probably would go to DC and do something within the admin, either at the Pentagon or on the Security Council, because that's something that I know a few things about. And friends with a lot of people that are there right now are very like-minded. So that would probably be it. Something over there. Yeah.
Nice. And what are some 2 or 3 books or podcasts you'd recommend to folks, whether it's military, behavioral health, entrepreneur, or whatever,
One of them I actually recommend to almost everybody, and this is whether they want a business or anything like that. It's actually by somebody who I've had the pleasure of speaking to in real life, a guy named Scott Adams. Have you heard of Scott Adams? It sounds like he's a cartoonist. He was a creator of Dilbert, the Dilbert comic strips.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But he also has written several books, and he actually has a regular podcast. Unfortunately, he's very sick with cancer right now, and we don't know how much longer he's going to be with us. But he wrote a book that is called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. The subtitle is kind of the story of my life. And it's basically a lot of his life lessons he learned and all the ways he failed in different things. And so one of the ones that gets me, that I tell a lot of people, especially the guys that want to go into business, whether, I'm not even talking about behavioral health. I was actually having a conversation with a guy who's really interested in doing something related to space, but it's not really his background. He really likes it, but he's not an engineer. He's young. He's just got out of the military. He doesn't have a space background. He's looking at it, and he's something he's really passionate about. And so here's what I say is, he says this, is that he had a whole chapter called, and this might ruffle feathers, says that passion is bullshit. And so what he means by that is that a lot of people, he cited an example. One of the many jobs he was an underwriter at a bank, underwriting loans, right? Business loans. And he dealt with a guy who was a college athlete, right? And he loves sports and everything about sports. I'm so passionate about sports, and he wanted to get a loan to open a sporting goods store, right? And I wanted to do this is why it's great. But all he really talked about was his passion, right? And then, that guy doesn't get the loan, right? And so,
of course not.
Right. And so, because he didn't quite have the plan, but instead they had another example of a guy that wanted to purchase 2 or 3 different dry cleaners. Now, who's passionate about dry cleaning? I'm not.
Nobody cares.
Right. Nobody cares. But it's a business thing and it makes money. But what he did is he's like, here's all the market research I did. This place is underserved. This place needs this. The owner is retiring. They have no backup plan. They have no succession plan. This place is here. We need to open one here because this place is underserved. This is demand, blah, blah, blah. And goes through all the details. That guy gets the loan. And also, once you start to get really good at something, then you become passionate about it. Right. And you start seeing success, then you become passionate about it.
Yeah, but the feasibility is more important.
Yes.
And then you can
100%.
become passionate about it. I cannot agree with you more. Every week I have a friend of mine, somebody I know, friend of a friend, come to me and say, hey, you run a business. I've got this idea. I'm really passionate about it. What do you think? And I'm like, okay, can it make money?
Right.
Is it an actual business, or is it just something you thought about that would solve a problem for you, but it's not a problem for anybody else? Like, do the numbers make sense? And 9 times out of 10, it's not, and they don't end up pursuing because there's no business. It's just like a passion project.
100%.
And there's room for that too. Like, you can make that a hobby.
Totally is. Yeah, 100%. And on top of that, he goes, hey, whenever you see a lot of these like business leaders at like conferences and keynotes and all that, and they start to give all the time, they just follow your passion, follow your dreams. Well, they can say that after they've had decades and decades of success, made tons of money and all the very successful.
Exactly.
And they always say passion, right? Because guess what? That's a crowd pleaser. That makes people feel good. They don't really, maybe some people say it, but what they don't say is, well, I worked harder than everyone else, or I'm smarter than everyone else, or I was more ruthless than anyone else. That's not a crowd pleaser.
You know saying that it's bad, I was passionate about X, Y, and Z sounds a lot better.
Right.
Rather than there was a lot of opportunity. I could make a lot of money. I was good at it. I had the tools to make it happen. I did. And now I'm passionate about it.
Right. Or also like I out hustled everyone. Or also like, look, there's trade-offs, right? I mean, look, say what you want about Steve Jobs. The guy saved the world, not saved the world, but he changed the world in so many ways, and he gave us these magic squares that we all have, right? But guess what, though, is also he wasn't a great person in his personal life. A lot of people say he was one of the hardest people to ever work for. He did not have a great family life. But guess what? Sometimes there's a trade-off. And so many of them really, really, really successful people have all sorts of other problems too, right? And
It's true. One thing that grinds my gears is when people try to associate the person with the myth.
Yeah.
So you could have somebody who's like highly successful, like Elon Musk is an example, is somebody that I am a big fan because there have been very few people in our lifetime that have changed the world like Steve Jobs or him or other people. And every time you hear about him, it's like, oh yeah, but he's got 13 kids and he doesn't care about them and his daughter is suing him. Okay. But that you can keep two thoughts in the same in your brain and say, the guy's a genius. He's contributed to more things than most people you ever know.
Yeah.
And he's also an asshole. And that's fine. It's fine.
But a lot of people don't want to be that. A lot of people don't want to be, they also still want to be liked, right? And they care more about that than anything else, for better or for worse,
Yeah, that's true.
100%.
All right. Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you so much for being here, man. This was probably, not to my credit, to your credit, 100%, one of the best episodes we've had, because it's hard to find people that just can talk and be interesting. And you were amazing on the podcast. So appreciate you making time while juggling business issues in the back. Because I noticed you're tapping, you're answering messages.
No, it's all
and stuff,
good.
so I really appreciate
No, thank you
it.
very much. And I'm sure you say that to all the boys.
No, I do not.
All right. No, I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you much. All right. Cheers.